Today we are going to go through how to make vocal chops like this. Hey guys, it's Will from EDM Tips. Now last week I went through a technique for creating vocal chops that is really quick, but it doesn't have as much control as other methods. But this week I'm going to go a bit more in depth and show you how to get the most control over your vocal chops that I know how anyway. So obviously if you want to write a good vocal chop melody, you need to have a good melody. Now if you want help with how to write melodies, you can click on the link as well, or you can download my free melody writing guide below this video. And without further ado, let's hop into the door and get it done. So the first thing we want to do is obviously bring in some vocals, and acapella is best because then there's more opportunity to get different chops from it. I'm just going to drag in this acapella from Splice. It doesn't matter if it's in the same key or not, no worries, because we're going to be changing the notes of each vocal chop anyway. We know this is 128 BPM because Splice told us, so I'm just going to rewarp, put in 128 there, put it into complex pro mode, that's very important. And now it's time to chop up the vocals. Now what I like to do is just solo it, and then I turn off the grid in Ableton Live by holding Command and pressing 4, and that allows me to kind of jump to the exact place I want without being stuck to the grid. And what we're looking for in our chops is firstly tonal sounds. So breaths and clicks and things like that aren't good. So if we listen to this, that hiss isn't good, but this is a better note because it's actually hitting a note. It's also good to look for chops that are not changing note halfway through. So if they just stay on one note, that's going to make your life much easier, sorry. So let's just grab that, Command and E to split it, delete what we don't need, just drag it. It's nice to mix some of the chops perhaps with a transient at the beginning and some of them just kind of a big block of sustain. Okay, so it changes note there, so we're going to splice it there, cut it there. Now I'm doing this really quickly, but you might want to spend a bit more time choosing the chops that you really love. But this is all good, we'll still get a good result. And it's good if it's one syllable per chop as well, because that avoids some timing issues. Okay, now the next thing to do is to load up a simple sound like a grand piano in this instance, and we're going to tune each of these chops to middle C. It's because we're going to then load those chops into a sampler, so we can basically just play those vocals as though they were an instrument themselves. Now, if you remember in my last video, I did this all in audio, which is another good way of doing it. So click that link to check that vid out. Okay, so let's get our grand piano. You can turn the grid back on now by pressing Command and 4. Now, what I'm going to do is I'm going to sync these each of these chops to the beginning of each beat or the beginning of each bar. And I'll show you why in a couple of seconds. So, okay, we've done that. Now I'm going to create a loop that's 1 bar long. Now the reason I'm doing that is because it's time to tune each of these chops to middle C. So I've just soloed the grand piano and the vocals by holding Command and pressing solo, so you can solo more than one. And that's middle C. You can see my MIDI is armed there. I'm just doing this on my MIDI keyboard. So now double click on that chop, and we now have to transpose the chop until it's in tune with that middle C. So that was 2 semitones up. Now bear in mind, because this is from an acapella, each of these chops are on different notes, and that's why we have to tune them all to middle C. So then I just grab the loop. And remember, you can do this in any DAW as well. This isn't Ableton specific. And you can play with the formants. Okay, let's just rush through and do these. Fast forward. Okay, so we have all of those tunes to middle C, and you can tell that's the case because if we play them all in succession, they all sound like they're on the same note. So they're the chops that we're going to use. Now the next thing to do is to bounce them, or if you're in Ableton, consolidate them by pressing Command and J. And this just, because if you double click into them, you can see it's actually still part of the whole acapella, but we want it to just be that little chop. And the reason is, if you try dragging these into a sampler without consolidating them, then the warp mode goes all funny and they change pitch, and it's a pain in the arse basically. Okay, so now we have them all consolidated. Let's create a new MIDI channel that's blank, and we're just going to drag in a sampler. Now remember, you can use any sampler that allows you to assign different key zones. So Contact is actually better for this by Native Instruments, but I'm doing it in the sampler because I want to keep it simple and so that you guys can do it with just the stock plugins. Okay, so sampler, grab all of those, shift, grab, drag them all into a sampler, open up the zone or whichever key zone mapping thing that you have. Obviously, if you press it now, if you select that instrument to play with, it's like plays all the sounds at the same time, all of the chops. So what we want to do is select root at the bottom C, because you can see that's where the bottom of all the zones are. And we now want to make these 1 octave big, so running from C to B. And the reason we do that is because we will have an octave of each chop to play with. So I'm just going to grab them in succession. So the first chop is from C-2 to B-2, and then from C-1 to B-1, then from C0 to B0, etc. For as many octaves as you need. And now, if we have a melody that we've written, and if you want help writing melodies, you can download my free melody writing gift, or you can click on one of the videos above. So this is our riff that was just done in an operator, just a basic synthesizer. To go with our chords. And we want that riff to be played by our vocals. So, okay, all we do is and ignore this vocal chop riff track. I'll show you what that does in a bit. So this is the sampler that we've just made, vocal sampler. All we have to do is, well, we can kill that grand piano, don't need you anymore, mate. Just copy the riff from your synthesizer into your vocal track. And now let's have a listen. Now at the moment you can't hear anything because you can see all of the information is above, like an octave above where the last sample is. If you had more chops, then you would be hearing something now. So all we need to do is go into that MIDI information. I'll just kill that riff actually, the one that we made with the synthesizer. Now grab all the MIDI notes, put them down an octave or two, and now let's have a listen. Sounds like chipmunks, right? But the beauty of it is now, because we've got all these different vocal chops on different octaves, we can just start experimenting and grabbing some of these notes and chucking them by holding shift and pressing cursor down. Put them on different octaves, which creates different vocal chops, or rather which plays different vocal chops. I'm just going to turn this filter off because I don't want that there. So let's have an experimentation with that. And as you do this, you'll have ideas for little flourishes and things in your vocal chop riff. So I want that to last longer. And something else that's quite fun is to loop some of them. So I'm just going to grab them all, go to the sampler, and I'm just going to loop them. Now some of them will sound bad looped, so you just turn the loops off on each separate sample as and when you want them turned off. And then it's just a matter of experimenting. So the next thing you can do is experiment with putting them down an octave, like some of them. Let's put this third one down an octave. So all we do is we look at the root note here. We're going to change it up an octave, which means it's going to play down an octave. So that can be quite fun, just to experiment with different octaves as well. And it's all simple because they're all in tune with each other. And the next thing to do that you can do, which is quite cool, if you go to the pitch bend range in whichever sampler you're using and make it 12 semitones, which is an octave, you can then start adding some pretty cool little pitch bends here and there as well. So I'm just going to choose pitch bend and MIDI and then start playing with them to make some little sweeps and whatnot. Like this. Now the next thing that you can do is start playing with the formants a bit more. Now a plugin that is great for this is Little Altar Boy by Sound Toys, and here's one I made earlier. So I'm just going to stick this on now, and you can adjust the formant here. You can actually automate it as well, which is pretty cool. So this is off, and this is on. So you can really hear it starting to take shape now. And then after that, it's a matter of putting in your usual processing or whatever processing you feel it needs. That's really for another video, but I've got an Oxford inflator here. I've got a Camel Crusher for a bit of saturation and distortion, an EQ to take out some of the low ends, and then Steve Duda's trusty OTT preset for the multiband compressor, or you can download the OTT free multiband compressor as well from Steve's site. And then you can put on some aux channel reverb and delay. And that is how to make vocal chops with loads and loads of control. I hope you enjoyed. Don't forget, leave me any questions that you have in the comments below. I try and reply to every single one, and you give me ideas for what videos to make, and I really appreciate you watching. If you like this video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe, and until next time, cheers and happy producing.